Michael.
Disappeared, not disappearing. He's disappeared. Hi. We are back. We are live on another Christian forum on Israel-Palestine. And with us today, we have Leyla King, author of Daughters of Palestine, and my co-host, Ross Wagner from Duke, and Gary Burge. I'm Michael Thompson from Whippenstock Publishers. Leyla is with us for the better part of an hour. So please listen and share this chat in your social media so more people can be better informed about Palestine and the issues there. Let me see. How shall I begin? Leyla collected these stories.
Just sorry to interrupt, Michael, but it's Leyla.
Leyla, forgive
Yes.
me, and thanks for correcting me. I don't know. Thank you. Leyla. We'll try to get to a smoother start from here on in. Leyla is a Palestinian-American Episcopal priest and founding member of both Palestinian Anglicans and Clergy Allies and the Small Churches Big Impact Collective. In the book, she writes about her family's experiences over several generations. And this is what we want to get into today. She's collected these stories, as I understand, Leyla, by recording your great-grandmother on a cassette recorder.
It was my grandmother, but yeah, my just
grandmother.
2 generations above my grandmother, yeah.
Right, but she, excuse me, yes, correct. She shared the stories of herself and your great-grandmother.
Yes, for sure.
And this became this little recorder, which some of us grew up with of a certain generation.
That's right.
Became the raw material for this book. So let's begin to discuss your book. How did it come about that you decided to take these memoirs and memories and share them at this time? What was the catalyst?
Yeah, so as you said, I had these recordings of my grandmother from way back in 2002. I spent the summer of 2002 with her. And we're talking hours upon hours of recordings. I went over to her house and asked her a question, and she'd start talking, and she'd just go off. So I had them, and I knew I wanted to write them down someday. But that the timing was never right. I not only did I not really have the time for it, but I think I was just not quite the right person for it yet. It took a lot of the experiences of my own life to begin to be able to write from an authentic place and a place that where I fully understood, I think, the kinds of traumas that people can experience, and certainly that my grandmother can experience in her life. And I also didn't have time, I was a 20-something-year-old and had my life to live and my stuff to do. And then I became a mom and had a job, and, things like that happened.
Sure they did.
And then in the fall of 2023, we made a move from rural Tennessee to the Austin area where we live now, in large part for my husband's job. So he started a new job, but I was sort of blissfully unemployed for about a 6-month period, which is probably about as long as I want to go being unemployed. But for a while it lasted. And right in the middle of that, October 7th, 2023 happened. And, and then October 8th and October 9th. And I really feel like it was this providential, this sort of Kairos moment where I had the experience, the life experience, the priestly experience, to be the person that could write this book. And, I didn't have a job, so that meant I had a little time on my hands. And, as many people did, as I still do to a large extent, there was a sense of real powerlessness that I had, that to sort of watch my people be obliterated and tortured and, murdered on such a large scale, and there be nothing that I could do about that. So it felt like this was the foreordained time to a large extent to really finally write these stories down and share them with the world as a way to humanize Palestinians, as a way to educate people about Palestine in a non-defensive way, and as a way to, speak, to make my voice heard as a Palestinian, as a Palestinian Christian, particularly. And it really just came together in that way.
Leyla, it's wonderful that you did this when you were 20 years old. I mean, the average 19, 20-year-old would never have the wherewithal or devote the time to create recordings like this.
Yeah.
It is a tremendous gift to your entire family. But
and
a lot
beyond.
Have. I think another generation holds stories and importance that we don't always recognize when we're young.
Yeah.
So, bravo, way to go.
Yeah, I give so much credit to my former self. It was a gift to myself now, to have had the wherewithal to do that. A lot of that came from the fact that I didn't really know about my Palestinian identity or heritage until relatively later in life. I was, a young teenager in my 15, 16 years old when I discovered it. And so it was a real discovery. It felt like a real discovery to understand what that meant. And as soon as I did learn of it and began to understand what it meant to be Palestinian, I was eager to dig as deep as I possibly could. So in a lot of ways, the thought process that led to my being able to do that was really grounded in the fact that it felt really new and it felt really important to me to be able to record those stories. And I was deeply close to my grandmother throughout my childhood anyway, so it was an easy enough ask.
That's fabulous.
You clearly had this raw material, and you went through a process of transposing these voices, these recollections. You write them often in the first person in the book. It's almost like you're inside of their minds, speaking outwards. And you're right, I must say, with a real beauty and elegance. I found myself often feeling like I'm in their living room and sharing these experiences with them as you tell. I'm afraid I might mispronounce their names, but can you tell us about some of the main characters in your family and therefore in your book? How did you say, Anissa?
Anissa, yeah.
Anissa?
Okay. So yeah, my great grandmother. Yeah, the book really starts. Yeah, the book really starts with my great grandmother, Zale, who was named Upset or Sorrow. So we get a little bit of her life and her story, but the real generations begin with my great grandmother Anissa, her second daughter, my grandmother Bahi, my mother May, myself, and then my daughter Beatrice. So those are the 5 generations. The subtitle is a memoir in 5 generations. So, those are the 5 generations of women that we get to see, and sort of their children and their spouses and their extended family members. And so it does. The book really follows those perspectives as the through line, and then every once in a while we get to go down some rabbit holes of additional stories along the way, which are also fun.
Can you tell me, for our listeners, especially that have not yet read your book, something, I don't know, quintessential about each key person in that
each generation?
In each. So if they, why?
Yeah.
I read the book because I'm interested, first of all, in this subject of Palestine. I discovered it, and then I got into it. Someone hearing this for the first time, what will they discover? Who will they meet?
Yeah, so all of these women are Palestinian Christians, specifically Palestinian Anglicans, whether in the Middle East, in Jerusalem, in Palestine, where they're sometimes called Anglicans, sometimes Episcopalians, or here in the States, where we tend to be called Episcopalians. So we're all women of faith, all Palestinian Christians. and all shaped, I think, by the events of the first part of the 20th century in Palestine, and shaped in various different ways. My great grandmother Anissa was the daughter of a Catholic woman who was married into this Anglican family, and her husband was sent to the front in World War I for the Ottoman Empire and was very quickly killed in that conflict. And the trauma that had on Anissa, I think, really followed her for the rest of her life, and shaped how she responded to things throughout the rest of her life, including the Nakba in 1948, when Israel was established and Palestinians were forced to flee and were sort of terrorized into that. And then my grandmother, being the daughter of Anissa, was, inherited some of that trauma of her own, and then experienced the Nakba firsthand as a 20-year-old, brand new newlywed with her first child, who would become my mother, in her womb, as she fled in terror from her new home in Haifa in Palestine, where she had grown up. And that has its effects on who my mother is and how my mother understands her life. And clearly it has its effects on me as well, even though I'm 2 generations removed from that particular trauma, the generational trauma of that, and also the generational faith that inspired, and that through line of faith throughout all these women's experiences of life and pain and joy. I also inherit that, and so I think that sort of describes who we are.
Leyla, going back to that period just for a minute, Leyla, your roots are Anglican in the Palestinian community. The Anglican Church or Episcopal Church is closely tied to the British Church of England. So what is the connection there? I mean, because of course what we have is Britain, which is directly involved in the administration of Palestine after the Ottoman Empire. And then the Anglican Church. So is there kind of a natural tension there between Anglican life and colonial life?
Yeah, absolutely. As there is in much of the Anglican Church across the globe, right? I think Palestinians are not alone in that fact. And my grandmother, she was always quick to point out that the British were not all bad, that colonialism, while we can name and acknowledge colonialism for the evil that it ultimately really is and was, that it, very few things in life are black and white and have no nuance to them whatsoever. And though the British did bring the evils of colonialism and imperialism with them, though they were instrumental in the mandate of Palestine and in the disaster that was the creation of Israel, all of that is true. And when they came, they brought wealth and health and medicine and education and progress for Palestinians. That is also true, and that is also part of the story. I mean, the Ottoman Empire was really terrible for Palestinians. Especially by that time, when the Ottoman Empire was quite poor. And so the British mandate was a step up, I think, from the Ottoman Empire. Again, not without its own evils and its own flaws.
Its own fallout.
Yeah, but it's. I'm also married to a Brit, so I can't be too mean about them. But I think this is all. All of this is part of the story.
Sure. Yeah, I like that answer. It's a nuanced answer, and I think you're spot on. Yeah.
Well, the story. Sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, no, I was just going to ask. I was going to go to a new topic.
I just want to ask one question about the storytelling that you do to wrap out that part of the question.
Yeah.
Just because I was really struck by the and I'm sorry, Ross, and then I'll let you. I'll cede the floor gladly. I was really struck sometimes with your turns of phrases in the book, where you would describe something truly hard and painful in the lives of your family, and with almost poetic lyricalness. Like the one that really stuck out to me was at the miscarriages, I think, of twins, where you describe the remains as translucent, as if constructed or made of tears, of your mother's tears. And I thought, wow, that's an image that I probably will never forget. But you did that again and again, and I wondered if it was more than just consciously or subconsciously, if this is more than just your personal style, but it also, is there a statement here about resilience, about faith, or even sumud,
That's a good question, Michael. And I've done a lot of these interviews about the book, especially, and no one has asked that question yet. I've gotten a lot of similar questions. What's a new one? And I really appreciate that question. I started by saying that I wrote the book when I did, in part because of like the coincidences of not having a job at the time, and and October 7th having just happened and all that sort of stuff. But I also mentioned that it felt like I had to have become the woman I was and the priest I was at that point. And I think what you're bringing forward is a sign and a symptom of that piece of the puzzle. For me, one thing that I have learned is that, I almost hesitate to say it because it sounds awful, but it's true. And when I reflect on my past and my own experiences, it's those moments of pain and of trauma and of anguish that in a lot of ways shape who I am the most and have been most impactful in my own understanding of myself and my own capacity to have empathy for other people and to come alongside other folks. And so while of course we don't wish that pain on ourselves or anyone else, there is a gift. There is a gift in the pain that we have. And, I don't want to sound Pollyanna about it either, but I recognize that and I appreciate that as part of the human experience. And I think and I hope that gets reflected in my writing. So
I want to just invite you to speak a little bit more on that topic, Leyla. I mean, on a university campus, one of the serious problems that people have with Christian faith is how could God allow so much suffering in the world? And we look at what's unfolded in Gaza, what's continuing to unfold. It's horrifying. What have you learned from your mother, grandmother, great grandmother, and sort of taken on board in your own identity as someone who offers the good news that God is for us in Christ? Like, how do you think about suffering as it relates to your family's history?
It's a great question.
Gosh, that is a good question. That's a really hard question. Let me start by saying I have no answers here, right? All I have are the reflections of my heart and the wisdom that I have gained. Most especially from my grandmother, from Bahi, from my experience of her, my relationship with her, and just my understanding of who she was and who she remains in my memory and in my heart. And, when she was alive and we were having these conversations, the number of times that she would say something like, well, back then I wasn't really I wasn't really a good Christian, or I didn't really believe, or I didn't really trust, right? Like back then my faith wasn't really strong. I didn't know God the way I know him now. But it was like a refrain that she kept saying over and over and over again. And her stories would reveal the lie of that every single time, right? Her stories would reveal just how trusting and faithful she was in the darkest times, in the hardest places. And I think the fact that she thought of herself as not being faithful enough is in fact a reflection of how faithful she really was, right? It's that sort of dichotomy of, or the paradox of humility, maybe. And I, if I die having achieved even an eighth of the amount of faith that she achieved in her life, I feel like I will have gotten a long way towards knowledge and intimacy with God. So I don't, again, how does that relate to our suffering and the sort of complete mess and disaster that we human beings make of this world? It's not something that's easy to articulate, but as people of hope, as people of resurrection, as Christians, as followers of Christ Jesus, I think we have to. I mean, I think there's no other choice except to put our trust in the God who we see revealed to us in Scripture and in our lives and in the lives of our ancestors, So I don't know, maybe it's not a very satisfying answer to that question, but it's the only one I can offer. And it's one I'm also still on the journey of figuring out. I wish that it meant that I could find some sort of peace while hearing about the suffering of my people, while experiencing some of that suffering myself. And I'm not there yet. I mean, I don't want it to sound like it's easy, because it's not. And I struggle with it every day, every moment of every day. So, but that's my goal is to get there. My grandmother was full of joy. She was just absolutely full of joy. How do you get to that place having experienced what she experienced in life? I don't know, but it's still a fact. It's still a reality that's where she was.
Leyla, if I can just sort of tag on to Ross, you've been just very transparent about this problem of suffering and what you witnessed there. And everybody on this call has a lot of experience in the Palestinian issue. So the dilemma is ours as well. For me, and I wonder how you would respond to this. As you hear these stories, you wrestle with these narratives, anger just can become a part of this. And there are times when I think many of us hear these stories, even reading your book or even looking at today's newspaper. How have you dealt with anger?
It's one hard question. You're not sending me any softballs over here.
Just so it's clear, we don't have the answers either. We're really grateful for you thinking with us.
We want you to solve our problems.
Yeah, we didn't tell you this was therapy, I guess, at the beginning.
Look, I'm an Enneagram 8, and I don't know if that means anything to anyone, but what it means for me personally is that anger is my go-to emotion.
Oh,
I get to anger really quick, and it's hard, and there's anger, I think, is an appropriate response to what we see in the world around us, to what happens to us. I think anger is protective response a lot of times, because especially in the face of our own powerlessness, anger is a useful tool and a highly appropriate response to a lot of issues. And when anger doesn't have a way of being usefully expressed, it will absolutely eat you alive.
Metastasize.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know of a worse poison than that sort of, unused anger. So for me, I have to find a way to use it. I really do. And I have to find a way to use it realistically. And in the end, I can't actually do anything productive about what's happening in Gaza or in the West Bank or heck in Lebanon or in Iran. Like I don't have that kind of power. I wish I did, right? So I can't use it in those ways.
Well, though, Leyla, you said you've never done anything useful, but I can't help but imagine that even writing this book
Well, exactly.
was an exercise in putting out there there was an engagement with that anger at some level, and
Absolutely.
then the kind of release that comes from having published the book. Am I right?
Absolutely. And that's what you took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, I think that's where that energy, because that's what anger is, right? It's a kind of energy.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
the real work for us, I would say, especially as Christians, is to do that work of discernment and to steward the gifts that you have.
Yeah.
So I can't do much for the people in Gaza right now, but I can write a book, right? I mean, I can speak up in that way. A lot of the work that I do in the church is around storytelling and education as a form of advocacy. That work I can do, and it may not have an immediate impact on the people and the suffering that's happening in Gaza and the West Bank right now, but it has a long-term effect. And this goes back to being a people of faith and trusting in God, that the outcomes are in God's hands. That's a learning that I earned from my work with small churches. So yeah, I think that's where the anger goes.
Yeah, I get it.
Sorry for the echo. I don't know where it's coming from. Maybe we can try those talking mute or mics until they might produce it. I don't know. Rob is behind the scenes trying to do it, I'm sure. Was going to follow up on that. Yes, on this train of thought. You make something. I'm not sure if I saw this in your book. I think I saw it in another interview, of the fact that both your American identity and your Palestinian identity are very important, not only to you, but to this project. And I do wonder if as you've taken this anger for energy and these memories, and you've written this story, has both your position as a Palestinian American and now your role as an author, as a person of the cloth, all of these things, have they helped you as an advocate? Have they opened doors for you? Does this story lend itself for you to get called to speak to this issue in other settings?
Absolutely. This book has been such a gift in so many ways, and one of those ways is that I'm available for speaking gigs and preaching and teaching, and because I am able to use storytelling so effectively, I find it really gets behind people's sort of natural, instinctual, knee-jerk reactions and defense mechanisms about Palestine and Israel. Most people think they know already everything that they need to know about Palestine, and they have a place where their opinion is, and there's sort of no thought that it could be changed. And there's very little that sort of rhetoric and debate, even history, facts on the ground can do to change that. But if you tell a story where people are invited to empathize without their even knowing, right, with the character in the story, with the hero in the story, whatever it may be, all of a sudden it opens up space that couldn't be opened before. So absolutely, it is such a joy and a real sense. I get a real sense of vocational fulfillment out of doing this work, primarily in churches. And again, there's a sort of niche that I get to fill as a very white passing Palestinian American with no discernible accent of my Palestinian ethnicity, right? As a priest of the church who is ordained and can preach in these places without any problems. So there's a real privilege I hold in that. And with that privilege, I think, comes responsibility and vocation, right? So I take that very seriously, and try and live as fully into that calling as I possibly can, along with all of the other demands on my life and person and time.
In church settings, I'm sure the fact that you're a priest lends you that authority. When they discover that you also have a Palestinian heritage, does that make any difference? Does that? I imagine in some cases it might make some people actually leery a little bit of you. In some cases, I don't know. I'm just trying to get into those spaces.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of an intersectionality of the things you bring here, and I'm trying to imagine who you're bumping into. And in my settings, you would certainly meet people who would be leery and people who would be interested.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I am just so far away. I'm just so far away of the image that people have in their heads of what a Palestinian looks like, right? I'm just such a distant, like so far away from that stereotyped image that most white Americans today, particularly Christians today, have in their head of what a Palestinian looks like. It's not a caller, probably not even a woman for that matter. Certainly not a caller, certainly not someone as white-skinned as I am, certainly not someone who talks like I talk, so all of those things I think really work to my advantage, because there's this moment of shock where when people don't know who I am and then they discover who I am, there's this moment of shock that really, because it wipes clean all of the sort of buildup of what they think Palestinianness is and looks like, that it opens up this opportunity for me to speak into that.
You get behind their prejudgments.
Exactly. And so it works really well. And again, I think it's a huge amount of privilege that I carry, that I'm able to do that. And I have Swana. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, Southwest Asian and North African. So we're talking about all Arabs, but also like Iranians, Armenians, all those sorts of folks too. So I have Swana friends, and particularly clergy friends in the church. And I don't know any one of those people who looks quite as white as I do. I think of all my Swana friends, I am by far, I'm so much whiter even than my own sister,
You're probably burn in the sun like us. So
absolutely. I'm just one of the whitest Swana people I know in the world. And that's a huge opportunity that I think it is my duty to take hold of. And again, I think it's really for me, it's about vocation. I would use the language of vocation, of taking what gifts you have and using them for good in the world.
Well, one of the opportunities you've taken is to form this Palestinian Anglicans and Clergy Allies group, and I'm curious, sort of what prompted that in particular, and what have you found both opportunities and maybe obstacles in speaking into this space?
Yeah, that's another great question. Y'all are very good at this. So the PACA, what we call PACA for short, has been a really organic sort of group that has grown out of particular, just the particular soil that we find ourselves in. It also grew out of the consequences of October 7th and 2023 and what happened there. I had a couple of clergy acquaintances at the time, all women, who were serving in unique situations where they felt a little bit of some tension between what they felt like they was incumbent upon them to do, how they were called to speak out, how they were called to be in the spaces where they serve, and also some sort of demands about, a purple congregation or being a chaplain at a university or something like that, where it became difficult to sort of navigate how to show up in those spaces. And so they actually started talking before I became a part of the group. And they asked me to join. And I was like, yeah, I don't think I have the bandwidth for that. I don't think I have the mental space for that. But after a couple of times of meeting, they reached out to me again. And they said, we just come for one. We don't have any Palestinians among us. And you, as someone who has served as a parochial priest, and, you know, we would really appreciate hearing from you. So I just showed up in a Zoom room with them, and I discovered that much more than me sort of imparting any sort of wisdom, there was a real allyship. I mean, they were showing up for me in a way that just helped me thrive and flourish in what was a really difficult time for all of us, but particularly for Palestinians, right? So from there, and realizing what good allyship did for me and was doing for me, and the life-giving nature of it, it seemed like a good opportunity to build on that work, and to recognize, because I'm a small church priest at heart, because I am a parochial priest at heart, and there are elements in the Episcopal Church, certainly, but I think elsewhere too, there are elements of this like really well-intentioned, but in the end, I think damaging progressive liberalism that whose main tool is shame. You know, like if you're not using the right words, if you're not saying the right things, if you're not speaking out in specific ways, if you're not using the right rhetoric, if you're not preaching about this bluntly and explicitly from the pulpit every single Sunday, you know, you're doing it wrong, and how dare you? And I get that that comes from a good place. I get that they are wanting to advocate for my people, and I'm, you know, I appreciate that. And my experience is that doesn't work. It just is just ineffective and inefficient. And what I find much more effective is being in relationship with other people, telling the stories, coming alongside others, not just writing people off as bigots or as racists or Zionists or whatever, but really coming alongside of them and understanding where they're coming from. And it's slow work, you know, it's not going to change things immediately by any stretch of the imagination, but it is in the end much more effective, I think, and much more transformational if what we're aiming for is to partner with God in creating the kingdom of heaven here on earth. So these women understood that, I think, and understand that. And for PACA's main mission is to advocate for Palestine and Palestinians and show up as allies, but through the work of storytelling and education and prioritizing that pastoral relationship. That's why we are at its core a network of clergy people, because clergy people understand that pastoral responsibility that we have to remain in relationship with others across difference, unless there's a really good reason to break those relationships, right? We have a responsibility as pastors and priests to maintain those relationships and continue to work for the transformation of individual hearts and minds.
Yeah. What just strikes me that your own experience of telling your story and your understanding of how we just grow and develop as human beings leaves room for a lot of grace then, that, okay, I didn't know this last year. Now I know it. And so shame doesn't have to be the dominant emotion.
Absolutely. I mean, grace is what is missing in the world right now, like across the board. People have so little grace for each other. And and I think if our work is anything, particularly as Christian pastors, if our work is anything, it is to reinsert grace into every aspect, into every conversation, into every situation. And it's really hard. Like I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good at inserting grace and paying attention to grace and looking for grace and allowing for grace in most of the situations that happen to me sort of personally. But gosh, is it really hard when you like look at the national news? Like I have very little grace for some of our political leaders, and I'm still working on that. So we'll see.
So, Leyla, we have a fair idea of what the questions are that come to many of our listeners. And we've, had these conversations a number of times. But one of the things that comes back again and again, and you as a theologian and priest, can maybe show us how you've found your way through the forest and out into the sunlight. You're holding a Bible as you serve and work. The Bible has all of these land promises given to Abraham and his descendants. You have an Israeli state, claiming to be heir to those promises. I remember being at a Sabile conference in Jerusalem some years back, and an Anglican priest there said, the real problem here is that the Bible has been weaponized. Okay, that is really, that's arresting language. So with in the conversations that you have about Palestine, Palestinians, Holy Land, et cetera, how have you come to understand these land promises?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, how much time do we have here, right?
Yeah,
like
I know it's not an easy question,
forever.
But maybe it's the most fundamental question.
Yeah, it certainly is one of the fundamental questions. And I do agree that the Bible has absolutely been weaponized against Palestinians here, for sure. I also think that, it is different for Palestinians still living in Palestine to have sort of one answer to that question. I think this is one of those questions where me being a Palestinian and part of the diaspora is gonna impact my answer. So I think that my siblings who are still living in Palestine, people like Mother Isaac and Mitri Raheb, I think they might have a differently nuanced answer to this question than I do. Because as someone who grew up in the West, put air quotes around the West, but for language that we all understand, right? As someone who grew up in the West, it is particularly infuriating to have the Bible weaponized in this way, because culturally speaking, for people in Palestine, Israel, Lebanon, people in the Middle East, their relationship to scripture is different from ours in the West. In the West, particularly in the Episcopal Church and other progressive liberal denominations, we would never in a million years use the Bible to make claims about what should or shouldn't happen in sort of secular politics. And we see this happen all the time in, like take a issue like abortion or homosexuality, right? You get progressive liberals all the time who say, well, the Bible might say this, that, or the other, but we are going to realize it. We realize and acknowledge that happens in a certain context, right? That we have to read the context of it, of how it's written in the Bible. We have to read the context of like who we are now as a people. We have to take into account our own enlightenment and our own knowledge and all that sort of stuff. And most progressive liberal Christians would say, just because I believe something doesn't make it incumbent upon the government to make that true for people across the board, right? We would never say that, you have to, if one person believes that abortion is immoral, that therefore it should be illegal, right? We don't do that. We just don't do that. There's that separation of church and state, right? When it comes to Palestine, all of that gets thrown out the window. All of that. And that is the effect of the Christian Zionism that we grow up on, like the Kool-Aid that we drink right alongside with our mother's milk, right? And a lot of times it is completely subconscious, completely unconscious. We don't know that we're doing it. We don't realize that we're participating in it. It's just a given that we take unquestioningly because that's the propaganda. We've been propagandized, right? And so I find that's one of the hardest things for me to break, even among the most sort of goodwill Christians. I had a bishop of the church find out I was Palestinian, and he told me, whenever I say Eucharistic prayer B in our prayer book, whenever he says the prayer before communion and it mentions Israel, he said, I never mention Israel. I just skip that line. And I was like, oh my gosh, this guy is so well-meaning. He was so well-meaning. But if you skip the line about Israel in our prayer book and in our Eucharistic prayers, you are signaling to the congregation that there is a one-to-one relationship between the modern day nation state of Israel and the ancient Israel of our scriptures. And that is exactly what you are meant to think and to believe, because that is the propaganda and the narrative that the nation state of Israel wants you to think and believe, right? Yeah. But it is actually the exact opposite of the truth, that there is no relationship between the native nation state of Israel today and ancient Israel of our scriptures.
Yeah,
right? But this guy, as well-meaning as he meant to be, had bought the whole narrative hook, line, and sinker, right? And he was totally unaware of that. Bless his heart.
Leyla, my background is Presbyterian, PCUSA. So a lot of what you're saying resonates with me. The irony I find is that while those parts of the Old Testament that talk about land promises we'd like to set on the shelf, we do always like to refer to the prophets and say they speak to our present circumstances. So it's really kind of a curious thing that we do. We're selective. You ever notice that?
Yes, I mean, of course we're selective, right? Of course we're selective. But Chris Bryan, who was I think he was a theology professor at University of South Sewanee ages ago. He has a book called "And God Spoke," which is a really let me just plug some random book here, but I'll plug that book. It's a really wonderful, really accessible way for most Christians in the pews to learn about and think about how we think about Scripture as the holy Word of God, what that means. And what he does in that book is point out that there is and this is not new, but there is a narrative arc in all of our Scriptures that preferences the poor and the suffering and the oppressed. And if you look at that arc, it is very clear about where the moral imperatives are and where right is and where wrong is. So of course there are certain texts that we prioritize. And that I think is part of being human. But we have to always do so with that self-awareness and with that acknowledgement, and making sure that the plumb line that we are measuring those scriptures against and how we use those scriptures, making sure that it meets that plumb line that's set by the whole narrative arc of Scripture and salvation history. I would say.
Thanks, Leyla. It's complicated. We all know it.
Yeah.
But it's nice to have a fresh voice reflecting with us.
No, thank you very much. Actually, that's a good place to pull these threads together, I think, as you have shared your family's story, but also in a way as part of this bigger story. You brought it all the way to salvation history there. Up in the corner next to Leyla, you see the cover of her book, Daughters of Palestine, published by Erdman's 2025, right? Last year?
That's right.
And it's a good read. I will not take your month of Sundays, and it will help you care about the people of Palestine, who are, in many cases, our brothers and sisters, and when they're not our brothers and sisters in the faith, they are our brothers and sisters in humanity, and we should care for them. Thank you so much, Leyla. And
thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Look forward to seeing what's next down the road, whenever that comes. But meanwhile, may God bless you in your endeavors and in this ministry.
Thanks, friends.